Hi, I'm Gareth Kane. Welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. And today I've got another great guest for you, James Chudley, an independent strategic design consultant who specializes in reducing the environmental impact of organizations' online presence. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Hey Gareth, thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Now, there's a huge amount to get stuck into, but can we start at the beginning to give our guests some context? When did you first become interested in environmental issues, and then how did it become your career?
Yeah, good question. I was sort of thinking back, when did it really start? And I guess formally, I studied things like geography and biology at school, so there was always a bit of an entry point there. But growing up, my dad ran an environmental studies centre, was a biology teacher, and we spent lots of time outside. So I think I was, introduced to these sorts of things probably indirectly from a very early age. But then I went on to do an environmental science degree in Leeds in the late 90s, which was, I guess, the beginnings of my more formal education. And then when I finished my degree, I carried on working at the University of Leeds, working as a research assistant. But there was a real lack of environmental jobs. It was a really tricky time looking it was a Guardian on a Wednesday. You'd open up the environmental section. There were two jobs, and it was a bit, that was a bit sad. But then you go to the new media section because it was the beginning of the dot-com boom, and there were loads of jobs. And so I left that, I left that world really, and kind of went in pursuit of a job within new media. But always thought I would end up working as an environmental protection officer or something like that for an organisation like the Environment Agency, and came back and actually worked for them when I moved down to Bristol, but worked on the intranet. So I had like a technology related job within a field that I understood, which was great because I understood the people who were using it and the sorts of things they were trying to do, which really helped me to kind of design a better intranet, if you like. But it's only really relatively recently that I've kind of, I guess, moved more in this direction and rediscovered my roots, if you like. And focusing on sustainability, but within the context of digital, which is an area I've been working within very closely for the last 20 years. So kind of come home really.
Yeah, that's fascinating the way your interest diverged and then converged
Yeah.
again, which I think happens for a lot of people. I sometimes argue that when people say, "How do I get into that?" and it's always, "Well, what skills do you have?" And I suppose you started with some environmental skills, then went down the user experience, internet side, and then brought them back together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I recently took voluntary redundancy, which was the big kind of turning point, if you like, in terms of having a bit of a forced stop and think, and what should I do next? And I went pretty rogue, actually, to be honest. I thought, I've spent a lot of time staring at the screen for the last 20 years. I'm going to spend less time doing that, and I'm going to learn how to make cricket bats. I'm just going to go, the classic, I think there's quite a classic pattern within people who work very much in a digital world. They want to do things with their hands. And there's a frustration that I've created all these things, but I can't show you any of them because none of them exist anymore. And, I want to get stuck in. So I've had friends who've kind of learned how to make boats and gone off in lots of different directions. So it's a quite a common thing. But I did that for a bit and thought, actually, ironically, this isn't particularly sustainable because it's quite hard making physical things, particularly doing it for a living. So I thought, actually, I love doing the work that I've done over the last 20 years, but how can I had become more and more aware of, the environmental impact of the internet, and had a bit of a eureka moment and thought, well, maybe I could kind of pull these things together and combine everything.
Yeah. So you've led me on nicely to my next question, which is what is the environmental impact of the internet?
Yeah, well, this is quite amazing. I mean, again, I feel like even though I suppose I've been in and around these sort of topics for a long time in different guises. It was only relatively recently that I became aware of the environmental impact of the internet, and I had no idea. I mean, we were back about a year and a half ago. I was working within a big user-centered design consultancy, so a classic kind of consultancy environment, and there was a working group of us who were focusing on or interested in sustainability, but it felt very hard to kind of work out how we could weave it into projects and make it something that our clients were interested in and talking to us about as being a kind of key priority for the work we were doing. and I became aware of the environmental impacts of the internet and kind of associated issues through a meetup group that I go to in Bristol called Service Design Bristol. And there was a chap there called Ned Gartside who works for DEFRA, who's a real pioneer in the world of, I guess, sustainability, specifically around service design. And he was talking about these kind of issues and talking about how the internet is responsible for higher carbon emissions than the aviation industry, which I just thought, well, I can't understand that. How how is that even possible? And having worked for an organisation within the aviation industry a couple of years previous to that was that was even more significant for me, because I remember at the time thinking, how do I feel about working for the aviation industry? This is slightly problematic. But then I thought, I've been working within a field within digital design that's all about making things better. It's about making things easier for you, easier to use for people, making things less onerous and faster and easier. So I've sort of felt that over the years working digital, I've been trying to make the world a better place, and almost had this realization that, well, perhaps I've been working in an area that's having more of an impact than I ever imagined. And so that really kind of blew my mind and made me kind of sit up and think about, well, why is this the case, and how could it possibly be the case?
Mm-hmm. I was on your website earlier today, just doing some background research, and you say that if the internet were a country, it'd be one of the top 5 polluters, which just that in context.
It's baffling, isn't it? And you sort of think, well, how can this be the case? And then when you start to read a bit more into it, it's of course due to the amount of energy that it takes to drive the infrastructure of the internet in terms of the storage of information, the transfer of information, and of course the production of the billions and billions of devices that we all use to access the internet. So, and it's a weird thing to comprehend, isn't it? The internet doesn't feel like a physical thing, but behind the scenes, behind the screen that we all spend our day staring at, there's a lot going on, and it's hard to understand what that stuff is. I'm not a technical person, and so I find it very hard to even begin to comprehend the scale of that infrastructure, and it's because we never see it, do we? So we see planes, we understand that, we understand about the carbon footprint of physical things, journeys, those sorts of things. But digital things, it's a completely different realm.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those sort of big digital organizations, big digital companies, were massive purchasers of renewable energy, which I suppose helps drive sustainability for other people. And there was all this, I don't know how much of it was just sort of pilot projects, but there was all this talk of moving server farms north of the Arctic Circle. So cooling load would be reduced and all that sort of thing, because you could just open a vent and all the heat would be sucked out into the Arctic air. But now they're even talking about developing small nuclear reactors just for server farm.
Wow.
Server farm, which I find quite extraordinary. And I suppose that's the rise of, first blockchain was very energy intensive, and now AI seems to be soaking up quite a lot of energy.
Well, absolutely. And it feels like there's an arms race going on, isn't there, within big tech, in terms of, they can't stand still, and they have to they can't lag behind the competitors. So it's a race for energy, isn't it, and kind of processing power, and it's all about scale, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So yeah, the energy consumption of that must be is clearly absolutely vast. And again, as a kind of an end user, if you're just doing a quick ChatGPT or whatever it might be, an innocent search, you've got no sense of that, do you? You have no feeling of that. It's completely invisible, which is, I guess, is why it's an invisible impact. But it does feel actually, I think the AI thing's an interesting one in terms of it feels like there's more and more stories in the kind of media about things we've been talking about in terms of energy usage, which feels like it's kind of starting to make a connection in people's heads between the use of technology and an environmental impact, which perhaps wasn't there before. So in as much as it's clearly not a good thing, I think perhaps it's making those connections in people's minds and helping them to become more aware or accepting of the idea that things on the internet could have an environmental impact, which was possibly a stretch too far, maybe even a year ago.
Yeah. It is because obviously the internet as a thing, has lots of opportunities for decarbonizing. You and I are meeting here electronically rather than
Mm,
to burn a lot of fossil fuels to meet somewhere at a mutual place where. And I did previous interviews for a book. That's what I had to do. I had to travel around the country.
yeah.
But it's always seems to be that sort of slight rebound effect that our usage of stuff always expands to fill the available space, but in this case, electronic space or energy space. So yeah, I find it very interesting the way what was going in one direction suddenly seems to be diverting a certain extent in another. Going from a force for good to not so sure now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, the impacts of COVID and obviously the becoming so normal now to work from home and use these tools. And, arguably it was interesting. There was almost an argument for working from home and environmental perspectives now in terms of, not traveling and not commuting. And I wonder how that stacks up now in terms of, our absolute reliance on technology to stay connected, despite people's best efforts of trying to encourage people to come back into the office, which doesn't, I don't know, that doesn't feel like it's working potentially, does it? It's clearly a massive problem now. But yeah, you're right. There is a rebound effect, isn't there? We found a new normal, and our lives are constantly changing, and that's going to continue to happen. I guess, which is I was thinking about this in terms of like where's the responsibility in terms of, I guess my focus has been very much about reducing the environmental impact of specific websites. And you could say actually, there's a consumer should have a choice in terms of what they use. Like if I choose to buy some food from the supermarket, often it will have food miles, those kind of food miles labeling, so I can make responsible choices as a consumer. And if a website has an environmental impact, then arguably I should make that choice. If I want to book a holiday through Thomas or like TUI versus, I don't know, Alice Sordays or something, then should I have that knowledge beforehand to know the impact of my choices? But then you think, well, actually, that's a hard thing to do. But actually, the kind of focus should be on the provider of that service to make me aware of that and to minimise that, as opposed to force me to have to make those different choices. So yeah, obviously things are constantly changing, but that rebound effect is really interesting. But of course, people will always seek the easiest way to do things and the most convenient way to do things, and that's perfectly natural.
Yeah. So digging into a website, I have a company website, which is quite a simple one with sort of fairly static pages apart from a blog and some embedded video and bits and pieces like that, but it doesn't have any particular bells and whistles. So what can I do then to reduce its carbon footprint?
Yeah, no, great question. I guess I'll just take a step back a little bit in terms of kind of how I've got to where I've got to in terms of my kind of almost like another eureka moment in terms of I was working on a project for a government website called Talk to Frank, which is a drugs advice website, and we were tasked to improve the performance of that website for people who are going to access it via mobile devices. Mm-hmm. So in terms of improving performance, that's really, can we make this website download faster? Can we make sure that people imagine there's a teenager, the case study was already, okay, there's a teenager at a festival, they've got a really dodgy network connection, maybe a 3G network connection, they're considering, taking drugs and they want to get some advice, and they're maybe, they're vulnerable at that point. They may have an old handset, they may have inherited a phone from one of their parents. So they've got an older phone that's not the best, they're on a dodgy network connection, but it's really important they get the information they need. And so we were tasked with trying to improve the performance of that website for a case study, just to kind of prove our credentials, if you like, from the perspective of providing good mobile experiences. And I was working with a very talented developer who did lots of work behind the scenes to minimize the page weights. And by that, I mean the kind of file size of the specific pages. So we looked at some key pages, homepage, search results page, drug information pages, and he made various changes to, I guess, minimize page weights and improve the performance of that website. So very much kind of a developer was doing the work as opposed to a designer in that instance. But there's lots of design changes you could make as well that would make an impact. And we did the work and we produced the case study, and we found that after doing that work, the pages, I think you managed to reduce the weight of the pages by up to 80%. The information was being served 30% faster, which was astonishing. We were like, this is great. This is our great case study. This is exactly what we wanted. And then one of the tools that he was using to do, I guess, to tell him the results of his work said, oh, and also the carbon footprint's been reduced by, I think, 80%. And wow. It was a completely, we didn't mean to do that. Like we didn't set out to do that. It was a complete unintended consequence. And I remember having this kind of moment. I thought, well, hold on, we've reduced the carbon footprint. That's a good thing. We've made it go faster. That's a good thing. And that's often what clients of the work that we do are very focused on, and rightly so. It's important that their service works really, really quickly. So they can ensure that their users have got good access to it wherever they're trying to access it from, regardless of their device, and they can buy what they need to buy or do what they need to do or whatever the website's for. And I thought, well, actually, that's good for obviously Talk to Frank isn't a profit generating website. It's all about the kind of, I guess, the prosperity of the organization that's running it. But if it was a commercial site, then that would be good for their profit. It's good for the planet. Obviously, performance is improved as well. But also, the people who are using that website benefit because the pages are downloading faster. We've made it simpler, easier. They're getting the information quicker. I just thought, well, this is amazing because everyone wins. It's very rare that. Quite often the job that I do as a user experience consultant and service designer is about trying to, you have a requirement from the organization who's your client. And sometimes it's very difficult to kind of marry that with what we'd call like a user need. So a client, years ago may have said, actually, we want to automatically, say, for example, we want to automatically opt people in to receive emails from us. And I would say, well, I've done some research with users and people don't like that. That's cheeky. That's kind of, underhand. And it's a trite example, but often kind of a user requirement is at odds with a business requirement. Mm-hmm. So it's quite, and I'd always be trying to fight the good fight for the user. And now you're trying to fight the good fight for the planet and think, well, blimey, how are you ever going to kind of keep everyone happy? It's very difficult. But by focusing on performance, that's for me, it's a perfect Trojan horse for a sustainability or environmental agenda because, again, you get these other benefits. So, sorry, it's a long-winded answer to your question, but
no, very interesting. I'm intrigued by this idea of page weight.
Okay.
I have enough knowledge to embed a link in an HTML page.
Yeah, of course.
That's about it. So if you, to somebody like me, what makes up page weight? What's the sort of beer belly that you try and get rid of?
I think it's it's a perfectly valid question. It's a weird notion in a way, isn't it, of a digital thing having almost like a physical attribute like a weight. But of course, the more content or the more components that a page has. So if you imagine, let's think about the homepage of a newspaper website. Let's take The Guardian. It'll have lots of images, typically, lots of video, lots of adverts, lots of text, and all of those contribute to the file size of the page. And so, they all, and actually that's a good example in terms of, those sorts of pages are often rammed full of content. And it's there for different reasons, of course. There's lots of different agendas as to why those things are there, but you can use tools to measure the carbon footprint of those pages. So there's lots of tools out there. There's website Carbon Calculator, Eco Grader, Cardamom, Bioscore, you name it. It's the more I've looked, the more I found here. And so what's useful is that there's relatively quick ways to get a sense of the performance of those pages from, an energy efficiency point of view. And it's as simple as putting, you could take the URL of your website, put it into one of those tools, and it will say your website is a bit like those energy efficiency ratings you'll see on a fridge or a white good for your kitchen. So your website's an E. An F is, I think, probably the greatest one, and it will give you a sense of the amount of, if you can put in, if you know the usage stats of your website, imagine you're getting, 20,000 visits a month or whatever it is, you can put that information in there as well. and it will tell you, well, actually that relates to this amount of carbon. um, and also some of the tools start giving you some advice about the sorts of things you can do to improve it. So it might be, oh, actually, if you've got lots of video, oh, how are you compressing your video in the right kind of way? Are you just importing a raw video from your phone or from a camera or something? And actually there's steps you can take to reduce the file size and still maintain the quality, and that's the same for images. So this has all kind of led to me kind of thinking about, well, could I come up with an approach that people could use to kind of decarbonize their websites? And I've been focusing specifically on what I'd call user journeys. So a user journey in a digital world is, okay, user lands on the homepage, they go to a search results page, they go to a product page, and then they maybe buy something, go to a checkout. And so that's like a journey. And it's a way of saying, well, actually, let's not try and improve the entire website, because lots of people's websites are vast and it's overwhelming. And of course, overwhelm is a massive issue in the world of, climate, isn't it? It's like, this is an existential problem. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. We don't know where to start. It's too much, but I don't know where to start, so we won't start, which of course is the worst possible outcome. Yeah. So trying to break this thing down and start small. So choose the highest value journey on your website. It might be the thing that the users use most often. It may be the thing that makes you the most money, or whatever it might be. And then systematically decarbonize that by using these calculator tools to tell you how they're performing, and then working through, there's a set of things that you can do, like following the web sustainability guidelines, which is a lovely long checklist of things to minimize, I guess, the environmental impact of those pages. And then as you're working, much as we did with Talk to Frank, you can keep checking to see the impact of your changes and say, oh, well done, you've reduced it by this. This is the impact. So it's quite rewarding, because you get the feedback loop is quite short. So very deliberately pragmatic, because again, awareness is growing, but it feels like kind of tooling and guidance as to what to do is lagging behind. So I'm really keen to kind of give people practical things they can do today that will genuinely make a difference, and also make people feel they're doing something positive, which is hugely important, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm interested as well as the sort of cross between the user experience with a small u and a x, and the carbon footprint, because it sounds like the more usable the website. I have a particular hatred for those local media websites that.
Oh, really? Like local newspapers?
They almost give me a migraine. It's like being thrown into a disco when you've got a hangover. It's terrible. And if that was a good excuse to try and get them to tone down the pop-up videos and adverts and all the rest of it coming up in left, right, and centre all over the place, I think it would be a good thing. I was just thinking. Oh, sorry.
Actually, that example is a perfect example, because when I was working as a user experience consultant, and rightly so, if I told someone at a family party I was a user experience consultant, they would just look at me blankly and say, well, what have you done with your life? What the hell's that? And so that's all about making things as simple and easy to use for people. And usefully, I've found that lots of the kind of principles behind good user experiences, like make things as simple as possible, remove distractions, give people the quickest path to do what they need to do, don't take up too much of their mental energy. All of these things are perfectly applicable for sustainable design, which is great, because all the entire UX community can now help out and jump on this kind of sustainability agenda, and not feel they have to learn a load of new skills and it be scary and intimidating. It's like, you're already doing this stuff. We need to ensure people can come and do what they need to do quickly and easily from a sustainability point of view, so they're minimizing the amount of energy that they're using. But also it's about reducing the amount of mental energy they're needing to use. Like, why should it be like taking an intelligence test just to find out whether the traffic's reduced on the A4? Or if you go to your local newspaper website and an advert's flying and another advert and then a video starts playing, and you're just like, can you leave me alone? I mean, this is madness. So those two things are very aligned.
Yeah. And again, when I was preparing for this, it reminded me of one quote that has been particularly influential for me for a few years. But it came from the user experience community. And Mike Monteiro.
Oh, right.
Who, in his book Ruined by Design, he has a beautiful line: "The world is not broken; it is working exactly how we designed it to." To me, that's you've been talking about design and good design, and being environmentally friendly design.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the whole thing that this quote to me encapsulates, this idea that bad design and everything, climate change, everything is actually design decisions, even
Yeah.
if those decisions are being made passively. So I'm trying to formulate this into some sort of a question, but is that, is that how much can the thinking from, I suppose, user experience design be expanded out to the rest of the world?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, everything is designed, and it's really interesting when you acknowledge that, because you're like, well, wow, that's crazy. Because if someone's really thought about how that supermarket's been laid out, that's madness, because it makes absolutely no sense. And of course, we don't live in a perfect world, and sometimes designers get a chance to do what they want to be able to do on projects, and sometimes there aren't enough resources or there are other constraints, and so we don't live in that perfect world. But we have, I guess, the designer's job is to do the work upstream to make the user's life easier, or it should be, or to make sure these products and services are, create the best possible outcomes for the organisations who commission them, but also for the people who use them. So we can deliberately design things to have a lesser impact, of course, if that's a priority, and that's the problem. It's not always a priority, or sometimes it is in a designer's mind. And lots of designers have said to me, it's like, I'm well up for this, I want to do it, but my client doesn't understand it's not a priority. We don't really understand what we need to do. And I guess that's what I'm desperately trying to do in terms of raise the profile of the topic, but also help people to realize they've already got the skill sets. And there are different ways of talking about this, like, using performance as a Trojan horse. An organization may not prioritize sustainability. They may say they do, but in reality, they may not. But if they're not interested in performance, then you'd say, well, hold on. That's a really strange thing to not be interested in, because if you don't care about the performance of your website, maybe you shouldn't be running a website. It doesn't make any sense. So I've been a bit cheeky with that in terms of trying to, and it's great that it's there's a parallel between the two, because it's very convenient. So you can either use that as a focus of why you're doing this work, or you can use the environmental agenda as a focus if that resonates with the organization you're working for.
Yeah. As an aside, I can actually answer the supermarket issue because
go on.
My dad used to design the steelwork.
Oh, really? All right.
For
nice.
supermarkets, and the whole building is designed around basically you walking in with your trolley and finding an array of fresh fruit and veg.
Yeah.
At the far end, as far away from that as possible, is the bread. Even if they pipe the smell to the front, and the aisles are designed to at the optimum distance, not to annoy you, but to slow you down enough that you look at more stuff on the shelves. So it's all carefully designed to get you to buy more stuff.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And the kind of psychology of designing physical spaces has all been reused and repurposed in the digital realm as well. So of course the same marketing mechanics and the same the kind of brands are paying more to be shown at different levels on the shelves and things, aren't they? And interestingly, in my local supermarket in Sainsbury's, they've changed the layout of the store, and it's the talk of the town. It's completely screwed everyone over, because they're like, where's the shampoo? I used to go around there, and it has a massive impact. So it's really frustrating for people, and people hate bad design, and they complain, they stop using products and services and waste lots of their time just kind of using things that haven't been properly designed. But often that's because those people aren't involved in the design process. So that's something that's very much at the key of user-centered design. It's designing things, but involving those people in the design process, so you can watch them essentially fail as they try to use the thing that you thought was a great idea. And also see all these unintended consequences that you didn't even think about during the design process, but become very apparent when people start to use things.
Yeah. The other thing that sort of struck me talking about that is I get, like a lot of people will, a lot of spam. People try to sell me digital add-ons that I don't want or need, like an app. And I don't know who would want an app from me particularly. Or chatbots on the websites, the other one, because presumably if you start putting chatbots on websites, we were talking about ChatGPT and things before, presumably that starts to make its environmental footprint surge.
Yeah, absolutely. And but then again, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as a provider of a service, you're weighing up the kind of, well, is this going to save me a load of time and effort because it will automatically respond to all those emails I get from all of my viewers, so my users. So that might be doing a favor, but then what's the cost of that? And everything has, with every benefit comes a cost, doesn't it? And one of the kind of mantras, or the kind of the master plan almost behind all of this for me has been, if you're providing a service, the game really is to try and provide the maximum amount of value from the minimum input of energy, and that's what you're trying to do. So almost every decision you're making, it's like, well, what's the cost of doing this? I think this is going to be the benefit, but what's the cost? And you should be aiming to end up kind of net positive in terms of doing more good than harm. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of the broader impact of digital services. People are spending so much time on their phones. I read a crazy stat: 60% of the world's population are spending up to 40% of their waking hours online. I mean, what on earth is? I mean, that may be quite sort of blimey, and what contribution have I made to that? And that's only going in one direction. That's going up and up and up and up. And so, collectively, I guess people may think, well, I've only got a small website and it's not, I don't get that many users. And so, I'm not making that much of a dent into, by comparison to, AI and all these other tools. But of course, you've got to think about those kind of marginal gains of everyone making these incremental improvements, and all of those small changes making a significant difference. But also in the scope of your own products and services, just making them quicker and easier to use. You'll make more money, they'll be more successful. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that?
Yes, there's nothing worse than a website where you end up chasing around in circles trying to find the one important piece of information for you. Yeah. Which I suppose other things like, is there a trade-off in terms of search functions and that sort of thing between environmental impact? Because presumably when a search, even a simple search bar has to go through my however many years, 15 years of blogs, that has an impact of some sort. But that is somewhere where a user can get to something fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to sort of know exactly the impact of that specific tool on your specific site. I mean, if you were to sort of jettison your search, you would be, causing a lot of probably quite likely to cause a lot of problems elsewhere. It's like, well, why cut your nose off to spite your face? It's like the service you could offer with a minimum impact would be no service at all, but that's not realistic, is it? And I guess that's something that I've been really trying to focus on as well, in terms of, we're all hypocrites to a certain extent. We're all doing things. We could live greener lives, but if you need to operate a service and you need to generate an income from it, there are certain things that you need to offer in order for your proposition to be useful to your customers, and also a set of basic functionality they would expect. For a website of a certain type to not have a search would be weird, and it would be frustrating, and would do you a disservice. So you may seek to say, well, actually, I have to have one of those, and I'm going to sort of do it in such a way that has the minimum impact. But there may be other things that I don't need to have, or there'll be other ways that I can convey the same information that has a lesser impact. So again, all of these things are a trade-off.
Although I still find it bizarre that, given that Google, one of the biggest corporations in the world, was based on search, that so many websites you go into looking for a simple piece of information, type in a sensible set of keywords into the search, and you get nothing. You get lists of random things that bear no resemblance to what you're actually looking for, when you're just looking for the basic information, like when to put the bins out or something.
Oh yeah, and we've been spoiled by Google, haven't we? And the amount of times I've been asked by clients, why can't we have a website? Why can't we have a search that works like Google? It's like, well, just think of the resources Google have, and often people would use Google to search the specific websites as opposed to going to the websites and using the search engines because they work so much better. But yeah, that's a kind of constant frustration, I think.
Yeah. So the digital sustainability checklist on your website, is that a good place for organizations to start?
Yeah, I think I guess there's a few things that I've pulled together, and I've been publishing a lot of information certainly over the last 6 months, just to try and make these resources easier to find, and also try and simplify some things that I found quite overwhelming. I mean, the Web Sustainability Guidelines are a fantastic resource. They're still, I mean, they're constantly being updated and improved, so they're ever changing. But
Who publishes those?
They're published by the W3C, which is it's like a governing body, if you like, of internet standards, and they're responsible for lots of other standards like the accessibility guidelines, which again are an interesting. There's almost interesting parallels between accessibility and sustainability in terms of lots of the accessibility guidelines now are kind of are, I guess, legally binding, or there's a legal requirement to follow them. But wouldn't it be great if there were the same legal requirement to follow the sustainability guidelines? And perhaps that's coming, and hopefully that's coming in the near future. I've compiled lots of lists of resources on my site, specifically within this kind of process of decarbonising user journeys. So when you come to that point where you've benchmarked your site and you set some targets, it's now then a point to say, well, actually, how can we improve it? And you can go through that either systematically, page by page, or choose the worst possible culprits. But there's some simple things you can do. Almost challenge everything that's on specific pages and say, well, what job is this doing? What value is it offering? Can we do it? Do we need it? Could we do it in a different way? Is it paying its way? All these sort of simple things that I'm thinking, well, that's a nice way of thinking about, what job is this doing? Is it serving a user need or a business need, or can we get rid of it? Or again, is there a simpler way of doing things? And often this kind of digital spring cleaning never happens. It's just a case of we want more stuff, more features, more functionality, and which is exciting, but no one ever goes back and does the housekeeping and the cleaning up and the spring cleaning.
Yes, which is interesting because, again, to take Google as an example, I remember the old Yahoo and Lycos search engines, which were
blimey, yeah,
just again just an assault on the eyes, but with words rather than video and pop-ups and stuff. But Google got down to a type in the words, hit search, job done.
Yeah, absolutely, and gosh, yeah, I can remember some of those sites, and they were absolutely assault on the eyes, and thankfully we've kind of moved on. It feels like obviously design has hugely matured in terms of these kind of what we call design patterns. So good ways of doing things that people reuse across different sites, and think about the kind of the revolution in terms of the design of government services, who've really led the way in the last 10, 15 years and become the gold standard in terms of here's some things that are simple and easy to use. If you want to find out if it's the green bin's collected tonight, it's no longer like doing an intelligence test. It's great. Applying for a driving license is not the chore that it used to be. And some people are really revolting against that. It's boring, it's dull. We want flashing. We want movement. And there's often a tendency for that. But it's like, well, okay, that's interesting, but how's that going to help? Why are you trying to differentiate? By the amount of projects I've worked on, again, where we want to do search in a brand new way. We want to differentiate ourselves. We want to hide our navigation. It's like, well, why do you want to do that? Why don't you innovate with the quality of your product and your services? Don't try and deliberately be different just for being different's sake. Let people do what they need to do.
Yeah, and we're coming to the end of our time here, but definitely the message I'm taking for you is the Venn diagram of user experience and sustainability has a massive overlap. Much of what we want to do to cut the carbon footprint of our digital services also make for these sleeker, easier user experiences. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and also there have been these kind of design, much as you were saying about that Mike Monteiro quote. There's been these mantras that have been around the design world forever, like less is more, do more with less. The best design is the least amount of design possible. Like this is all. It's nothing new really, which is good. I mean, it's kind of those are all very sensible principles, and we should continue doing them. But now for a slightly different reason to maybe perhaps why we were doing them 5-10 years ago or even longer. So there's a perfect crossover, which is convenient because until it becomes a real kind of requirement, if you like, or there's a real focus to kind of create things that have a less of an environmental impact, we can lean upon other reasons as to why it's still a good idea. I mean, I was around when kind of UX became a thing, and that was a real oh, how are we going to encourage people to kind of make things easier to use? How can we make them care about their end user? And it's like that took quite a long time, and it feels like that's now normal. So it's almost like starting again, but for a different reason.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that was a very interesting look at the environmental impact of digital services and what we can all do about them. So I will put a link to your resources on
Right.
the show notes, and that just leaves me to thank you very much for joining us today, James.
Thanks, Gareth. It's been a pleasure.